You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 16th of April 2014. Pay shivers, the 30,000 reward is 7 years too late. Syria is now the biggest threat to Britain's security. Germany, refugee lives in a tree after camp torn down. 1 in 4 children in Europe at risk of poverty. Germany warns of war in Europe with Russia over Ukraine. Ukraine on the brink of civil war as armed troops enter eastern city of Kramatorsk. Over 50 Ukrainian armoured vehicles rolling towards Donetsk. Armed men kidnap schoolgirls in Nigeria. Dozens killed in Nigeria bus station bombing. Thought for the day, multicoloured swap shop. And finally, fly me to the moon. UK news. Pay shivers, the £30,000 reward is years late. Pay Shivers, a 15-year-old from the seaside town, vanished on 23rd of August 2007 after a row at her family home in Bisham. Her body has never been found. In 2009, a £12,000 reward did not result in any significant evidence. Lancaster Constabulary hopes the increased sum will incentivise witnesses. Lancashire Police are offering £30,000 reward to help solve the murder of a teenager years after she disappeared in Blackpool, promising to pay out to anyone who can help them find not just her killer but her body. Detectives say they have questioned 3,000 people about her disappearance but are still none the wiser about where she ended up. 20 detectives are currently working on the case, working on the assumption that she is dead. Andy Webster, the detective leading the investigation, said, "It's incredible to think that with all the technology and social media and traces we leave in our daily lives, that there are none that have led us to Paige. After exhaustive inquiry, the only natural conclusion we have sadly reached is that Paige is dead. I'm appealing today for information which will help us find her body, as we believe she has been murdered and her body disposed of." World at 8. Yes, well, after such a long hard search carrying on non-stop for the last 5 years, this is a wow of a conclusion. Too little and too bloody late in my view. Syria is now the biggest threat to Britain's security. The crisis in Syria has emerged as the biggest threat to Britain's security, the Telegraph discloses. The threat to the UK from returning fighters from the Syrian civil war is now the same as that from Al-Qaeda terrorists in the borderlands of Afghanistan and Pakistan. For the past 2 years, British jihadists have been able to gain access, bomb and weapons training, as well as further radicalisation. There are fears that British men who have been radicalised there are also being encouraged to return to the UK to carry out attacks here rather than staying to fight. World at 8. Those men don't have the guts to bomb the UK. If they did, even the Brits would develop cojones. European news. Germany. Refugee lives in a tree after camp torn down. Protests are continuing in Berlin after the demolition of a refugee camp last Tuesday. 5 refugees have gone on hunger strike and 1 woman lived in a tree for more than 100 hours. No change there. The hunger strikers on Kreuzberg-Oranienplatz, who come from Iran, Ghana, Uganda and Turkey, are staying on a tarpaulin at the north side of the square and are now in their 6th day without solid food. They tell the local they were undeterred by rain, cold or heavy police presence around them. Some claim they will face death or long prison sentences in their home and are demanding the right to stay and work in Germany. World at 8. Do I sound like a people person? To port them out of our misery. 1 in 4 children in Europe at risk of poverty. Over 1 in 4 children in the European Union are at risk of poverty or social exclusion as a result of the economic crisis, Save the Children said in a report published Tuesday. Between 2008 and 2012, the number of minors threatened by poverty across the 28-member union rose by 1 million to 27 million, or 28% of the total, the International Children's Advocacy Organisation said. The number rose by 500,000 between 2011 and 2012 alone. In Italy, 33.8% of the children were deemed at risk, compared to between 12% and 19% in northern European countries. In Greece, Hungary and Latvia, the percentage of at-risk children ranged between 35% and 41%, while in Romania and Bulgaria it rose to 52%. The report, commissioned in view of European parliamentary elections on May the 25th, blamed the economic crisis and poor distribution of resources for the rise in child poverty. Germany warns of war in Europe with Russia over Ukraine. Germany warned of war in Europe on Monday, with Vice-Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel stating that the continent was being dragged into a smouldering conflict with Russia over Ukraine. Gabriel, at an event commemorating World War I with French Prime Minister Manuel Valls, warned of resurgent nationalist forces both within Europe and in its neighbourhood. He said that good news several months ago from Ukraine, including an end to bloody violence against protesters, had since given way to an ongoing military confrontation and the realisation that Russia is apparently willing to let tanks cross European borders. Suddenly we are being dragged from the observer's position into a long, smouldering and incendiary conflict, which is also demanding a price from Europe in the form of sanctions against Russia, he said. World at 8. We in Europe should stay out of what we can't finish. World News. Ukraine on the brink of civil war as armed troops enter eastern city of Kramatorsk. Ukrainian troops have tightened their grip on the eastern town of Kramatorsk as President Vladimir Putin warned the country has been pushed onto the verge of civil war. Government troops drove 7 armoured personnel carriers flying the Ukrainian flag into the centre of Kramatorsk after seizing back control of a nearby airfield from the rebels on Tuesday. The airfield was reclaimed by Ukrainian troops using helicopter gunships after the acting president launched an anti-terrorist operation, prompting Putin to phone the German Chancellor Angela Merkel later yesterday evening and warned of the risk of civil war. During the conversation, the Russian president remarked that the sharp escalation of the conflict has placed the country, in effect, on the verge of civil war, according to a Kremlin statement. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Ukraine's interim prime minister, today accused Russia of exporting terrorism to Ukraine by using covert forces to organise armed separatists who he said had attacked Ukrainian forces and occupied state buildings. Over 50 Ukrainian armoured vehicles rolling towards Donetsk. Pro-federalisation activists in Ukraine's southeastern city of Donetsk say more than 50 military armoured vehicles of the Ukrainian army have been spotted in the region and are now closing on the city. 56 times of various vehicles are underway, including infantry fighting vehicles, personnel carriers and trucks for transporting people. They are moving towards Donetsk. We are getting ready to stop them, Igor Kakimzanyanov, chief of the so-called People's Army in the self-proclaimed Donetsk Republic, told RIA Novosti. Kakimzanyanov said that the personnel of at least 5 armoured vehicles sent to Kramatorsk, about 90 kilometres south of Donetsk, had switched sides and joined their ranks. This is 1 vehicle fewer than in earlier reports. The Ukrainian army started a special operation on Tuesday and a crackdown on self-defence activists in eastern Ukraine. The operation targeted the cities of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk in the Donetsk region. At least 4 protesters were killed and 2 others wounded Tuesday as Ukrainian troops stormed an airfield in Kramatorsk, local pro-federalisation supporters said. 2 others were wounded. World at 8. This is going the same way as Iraq and Syria in media hype. Ignore it and hope it all goes away. Armed men kidnap schoolgirls in Nigeria. Heavily armed men have kidnapped more than 100 girls from a secondary school in northeast Nigeria's Borno state and torched the surrounding town a day after deadly bombing in the African state capital. No one claimed responsibility for Tuesday's kidnapping, but fingers are pointing at fighters of the armed group Boko Haram, which means Western education is forbidden. The attackers killed a soldier and police officer guarding the school, then took off with at least 100 students, a state security official said. Some of the girls managed to escape from the back of an open lorry, other officials said. Many girls were abducted by the rampaging gunmen who stormed the school in a convoy of vehicles. Emmanuel Sam, an education official in the town of Chibok, where the attack took place, told AFP news agency. He spoke from Borno's capital, Maiduguri, where he said he fled after the attack on the government girls' secondary school in Chibok. The attackers came in trucks and on motorcycles and headed to the school, where they overpowered soldiers deployed to guard it, a witness who requested anonymity said. World at 8. No, this news has not made the TV headlines at all. Why? Dozens killed in Nigeria bus station bombing. A morning rush hour bomb has killed at least 71 people at a bus station on the outskirts of Abuja, the deadliest attack ever on Nigeria's federal capital. Suspicion fell on Boko Haram, though there was no immediate claim of responsibility for Monday's blast from the armed group battling Western influence, who are mainly active in the northeast. As well as 71 dead, police said 124 people were wounded in the first attack on Abuja in 2 years, Reuters news agency said. Security experts suspect the explosion occurred inside a vehicle, Air Commodore Charles Otigbadi, Director of Search and Rescue Operations, reported. The bus station, 8 kilometres now southwest of central Abuja, serves Nyanya, a poor ethnically and religiously mixed satellite town. Nyanya is filled with government and civil society workers who cannot afford Abuja's exorbitant rents. Visiting the site later in the day, President Goodluck Jonathan pledged that Nigeria would overcome the insurgency. The issue of Boko Haram is quite an ugly history within this period of our own development, he said, but we will get over it. The issue of Boko Haram is temporary. World at 8, oh yeah? What genie has appeared to Mr Goodluck? Unless he has a Kalashnikov rifle, I don't see how BH are temporary. Thought for the day, a multicoloured swap shop. Now I have a short follow-up to the talk on Proud to be British and what it means. This subject gave a lot of people food for thought and the comments were very interesting. Many of course understood the nature of my talk, but unfortunately some people did not. For transparency and in understandable English, I was not decrying, degrading or ignoring our many mixed race inhabitants, or in essence denying that many are very patriotic when it comes to Britain. But what you have to understand is this. Apart from America, one of the only countries in the world that accepts and indeed encourages mixed race marriages as a normal part of life, not just the occasional outcome. Now, apart from hearing of various personal mixed race persona, their lineage and their attitudes, I would say I still couldn't give a rat's arse on who marries whom and what colour they are from a personal or even subjective perspective. That information should be heard by someone who cares. Do I sound like that person? No, it is plain that I am talking about a country, a culture and a people who are in danger of being totally submerged and outbred, if not by Islam, by various other ethnicities in the world, but most of all, those over here and within our society. I was sent a link to the National Geographic site which showed the various colours and ethnicities of the US in the year 2050. The pictures are very pretty and take the best of all, or the four most evident ethnicities, and give them some white blood and voila, a set of beautiful people. But this is not the true story or outcome of such breeding in real life. It is the la-la land of celebs with money and no problems, balancing wonderful multicoloured babies on their hips whilst living in luxury in la-la land, often minus the fathers. No money problems, education problems or indeed child rearing, which is a minefield in itself. In short, worse than La La Land, as it is portrayed in the media as being everyone's right to have such a life, whether they be rich, poor or simple-minded. Now, amidst the size of the fact that I'm apparently a total racist cow, which I shall ignore, there is a small fact that I suppose I am, but what I'm looking at is the cause and effect of multiculturalism and what effect that might have on our future in this country. There is no ignoring the fact that East and West do not mix, or very rarely. White men who buy Thai brides are laughed at, as despite all the love in the air, it is finances that buy these ladies and sometimes ladyboys, and it is a fair price for those often awful men to pay for young and lovely arm candy, but it is still a price. It has been so since time began. Arabs have bought and sold young female and male slaves from Europe and Africa since before the Dark Ages. Many men had as many as 3 wives as they outlived them in Europe, and many more under various cultures and creeds and countries. It is nothing new. And indeed the only source of foreign blood in many a European royal house was introduced this way and throughout the world. Intermarriage was a method in itself of bringing in new blood to that family. It must be said that often that blood was chosen south of the Med to lighten that family, and rarely was African blood adopted by those north of this region. In fact, many less civilised tribes did not practice this and in fact killed anyone who threw or exhibited a faulty gene. They'd have a field day in the UK nowadays, wouldn't they? The world population grew and prospered to some extent with intermarrying for thousands of years. Mass migration and diversity propaganda were not needed during those times, and indeed part of my point being is that they are not needed now. Despite my personal misgivings on a mixed marriage, which yes, I have had in my youth, so I am speaking from experience, my problem is that men were made different for a reason, and apart from the Tower of Babel and King Nimrod being a personal favourite of mine, those reasons used to be evident and important. Now it would appear that despite various governments and the media all exalting the black and Asian cultures above our own, they are in fact denigrating and trying to extinguish this difference. How? By making the celeb culture and Marxism get married, that is how. Our youth, together with the youth of the US, are being encouraged to form partnerships from whatever different ethnicity is at hand to mix the racial mixture until it is no longer recognisable. And this is wrong. It's just plain wrong. It is wrong on so many levels, even I run out of time and words trying to explain. Ignore the white supremacists, ignore the neo-Nazis and listen to me. Races were made different. That is nature. That is what God or Gitchi Manito intended. Different people for different places on the earth, whether it was to accommodate weather, living conditions or what crawled out of what swamp, I don't know. But whatever it was different to the neighbouring swamp thing with different genes. The French say vive la difference, and they are right. I like the differences. I don't understand why the establishment exhorts, say, the African culture, whilst promptly on the other hand trying to demolish it by mixing the races. This isn't rational behaviour at all. As a nationalist, I am of course in favour of my own tribes inhabiting my own country, whether that blood flows in my veins for one generation or two or none at all. England is my birth country and I'm proud to call myself English with a few tweaks. I don't resent some early immigrant marrying out and living here with their offspring and calling themselves British, because of course they are. As a nationalist, I also like to view other ethnicities and cultures and find them interesting by their difference. Not because they all look the same to me. I can look in a mirror and see me any day if I want to continually look at a getting over the hill white woman peering back at me. As a nationalist, I would like, in a perfect world, to be able to go to parts of my own country and see people from my tribe who live in that part of the UK, not a plethora of everyone else. This is what is called nationalism, not multiculturalism or racism. It is the simple fact that even allowing for slight mixing of the races, which let's face it would not happen on the scale it's happening on if we didn't allow so many other ethnicities into this country, that when you go to their countries you'll be very lucky to spot a white enclave or even a half white enclave on their home turf. So there must be a reason why the UK has been subjected over the last 50 years to this casual potential genocide thinly disguised as the way forward for a multicultural hellhole. I don't care who is married to what or what they produce. I do, however, care that I do not want a mud-coloured multiracial population to overtake our particular Northern European stock, however well mixed the establishment say we've been. I do not believe it, rather like Victor Meldrew. The differences were made for infinity or until life perished on this planet. Different colours, different species, different everything, and everything is different. All our fingerprints are different, our ears are different, our skulls are different, our bloods are different, and our bone structure is different, and most importantly of all, our skin colour is different. And that is how, in the days of old, you could tell who came from what country, and it was not an insult or a racial stereotype, it was a fact. And to the would-be liberals and multicultural pundits, I would say, do you dislike the white race so much that you want to see it vanish? Is that the reason for all the hype and the ridiculous way anything foreign is cultivated and everything white and western is demoted and valueless? Is this the reason why mixed partnerships are encouraged within the media along with homosexuality? If you cannot outbreed us, you'll finish us off with non-breedable homosexual couplings. This is rather at odds with Islam here, and there could of course be a conflagration unless all the people convert to Islam, which of course, like Judaism, accepts all as long as they are Muslim or Jewish. Is this the plan of the Zogs or the New World Order? All different ethnicities and cultures have their strong points, and the buzzword here is different, and another is in their own habitat. not in my habitat or your habitat. Immigration will have to be stopped regardless of the powers that be and their long-term plans for this and your country. I was waiting for my eye test yesterday in a small local hospital and got to speak with a man waiting there. His grandfather, who was Ukrainian, died when he was 100 in this country and he learned I was BNP. Apart from the shock of him not rushing out yelling leper, leper, he mentioned UKIP in the elections, and after I told him a few home truths over Farage the Mirage, he said, "I hope that someone takes this country in hand and stops the rot." And we all know what he was talking about. The unspoken back-breaking straw that is immigration on a non-stop constant stream into this country of ours, and the implications are far from a celebrity cookout and a multicoloured baby double-page spread. Mixing the races has been verboten in most cultures all over the world for hundreds of years. It is nothing new, and like many, if not all things, there is safety in lesser numbers than in more numbers. The cause and effect of the mud people are all man-made and for a sinister purpose in the West, and good old-fashioned racism is not amongst them. And finally, fly me to the moon. This is a true story. On July 20th, 1969, as commander of the Apollo 11 lunar module, Neil Armstrong was the first person to set foot on the moon. His first words after stepping on the moon, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," were televised to Earth and heard by millions. But just before he re-entered the lander, he made the enigmatic remark, "Good luck, Mr. Gorski." Many people at NASA thought it was a casual remark concerning some rival Soviet cosmonaut. However, upon checking, there was no Gorski in either the Russian or American space programs. Over the years, many people questioned Armstrong as to what the "good luck, Mr. Gorski" statement meant, but Armstrong always just smiled. On July 5th, 1995 in Tampa Bay, Florida, while answering questions following a speech, a reporter brought up the 26-year-old question about Mr. Gorski to Armstrong. This time he finally responded because Mr. Gorski had died, so Neil Armstrong felt he could now answer the question. Here is the answer to who was Mr. Gorski. In 1938, when he was a kid in a small Midwestern town, he was playing baseball with a friend in the backyard. His friend hit the ball, which landed in his neighbour's yard by their bedroom window. His neighbours were Mr. and Mrs. Gorski. As he leaned down to pick up the ball, young Armstrong heard Mrs. Gorski shouting at Mr. Gorski, "Sex! Do you want sex? You'll get sex when the kid next door walks on the moon." It broke the place up. Neil Armstrong's family confirmed this is a true story. You've been listening to The World at 8. We will be with you on Good Friday as well. I'm Lynn Moser and I wish you all a very good night. Andy Webster, the detective leading the investigation, said, "It's incredible to think that with all the technology and social media and traces we leave in our daily lives, that there are none that have led us to Paige. After exhaustive inquiry, the only natural conclusion we have sadly reached is that Paige is dead. I'm appealing today for information which will help us find her body, as we believe she has been murdered and her body disposed of." World at 8. Yes, well, after such a long hard search carrying on non-stop for the last 5 years, this is... Dozens killed in Nigeria bus station bombing. Thought for the day, multicoloured swap shop. And finally, fly me to the moon. UK News. Pay Shivers, the £30,000 reward, is years late. Pay Shivers, a 15-year-old from the seaside town, vanished on 23rd of August 2007 after a row at her family home in Bisham. Her body has never been found. In 2009, a £12,000 reward did not receive. Shivers, the £30,000 reward, is 7 years too late. Syria is now the biggest threat to Britain's security. Germany, refugee lives in a tree after camp torn down. 1 in 4 children in Europe at risk of poverty. Germany warns of war in Europe with Russia over Ukraine. Ukraine on the brink of civil war as armed troops enter eastern city of Kramatorsk. Over 50 Ukrainian armoured vehicles rolling towards Donetsk. Armed men kidnap schoolgirls in Nigeria without any significant evidence. Lancaster Constabulary hopes the increased sum will incentivise witnesses. Lancashire police are offering £30,000 reward to help solve the murder of a teenager years after she disappeared in Blackpool, promising to pay out to anyone who can help them find not just her killer but her body. Detectives say they have questioned 3,000 people about her disappearance, but are still none the wiser about where she ended up. 20 detectives are currently working on the case, working on the assumption that she is dead.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 16th of April 2014.